Hello, everyone, and welcome to the July 7th, 2022 Kubernetes Steering Committee public meeting. My name is Kirsten. I'm going to be the bosun for today. A couple quick reminders before we get started. This meeting is being recorded and will be published to YouTube, so please be mindful of that when you are speaking on something. Second, this meeting and the entire Kubernetes community follows the Kubernetes and CNCF Code of Conduct. Please read it if you haven't, and be excellent to each other while we are discussing things. And the last thing that I will say is, if this is your first time coming to a steering committee meeting, I would ask that, because we have a lot of folks today, we have a very full agenda, please use the raising hand functionality in Zoom to indicate that you would like to speak on a particular topic. The topics that we have today, I have attempted to time box them to make sure that we get through everything that we need to talk about today. So I may interject and try and redirect or try and wrap up a conversation. So if you do have a point indicating that you're waiting to speak on something, using the hand functionality would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so let's get right into our agenda. First, we're going to start off with some CNCF updates. Paris.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Christoph. We actually have quite a few things at governing board level. Both are that's both short-term and long-term needs. I'm just going to start. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm sure folks might have questions, but we might not be able to get to it. Feel free to reach me on Slack or something afterwards in the steering committee channel, or DMs if you need anything or have any clarifications that you'd like. First one is, we do have some legal matters. The new legal committee has just sprung up inside of governing board. This is made up of different member companies that sit on the governing board's legal team. So for any legal matters that we have go forward, we would propose to that legal committee. And so some of the things that we have going on there is the opt-in legal private list for maintainers. That would be us to use, similar to the Apache Software Foundation. That's going to be proposed the next time they meet. Next time they meet right now is TBD. That's on me to figure out when that is. We are also waiting, excuse me, we're also waiting on answers to the questions that we had from the D&O insurance. The last time we heard from them was on the issue. If any steering committee members want to put that issue on the on the doc, that would be awesome for me. But we're just waiting on some questions. It sounds like we have insurance, but Stephen and others have put some questions on that the lawyers need to address first before we close that down and say, yes, we have insurance. And then also the legal fund resolution that according to Chris, we also have, but we need clarifications on what that is and how to use that from Chris. And I'm not sure if we also need to do any kind of proposal to the legal committee, or if we're using general funds for that. So also have to get clarification from Chris. And then DIMS, I see you putting the real name pseudonym issue. Do you want to jump in with just a high level of what that is?
It doesn't directly affect us right now, but
Okay.
this specific issue is about DCO and what a real name means, and does real name actually mean a real name for folks. So please go look at it, read through. There is one issue that was closed. This is a new issue that was opened. So read both issues and chime in on the CNCF TOC mailing list, or or on the issue itself. Thank you.
Thanks, DIMS. Yeah, and I'm guessing that will eventually go to governing board as well. So that's why we would like y'all to weigh in on those things. We are representatives for you, so please weigh in with your thoughts so that we can carry them forward. So the Special Issues Committee, good news here is we actually do have a process. That process was created a few years ago, right before lockdown. Obviously, lockdown and COVID happened, things got lost. So we're back to having some kind of governance / decision-making approval process inside of the Special Issues Committee, because right now we do have several very large and ambiguous things that are sitting in that committee right now. Some of those things include the Creative Staffing Fund. Sorry for the note takers, so I'm jumping around right now. But the third bullet is a great example of something that's large and ambiguous, which is the Creative Staffing Fund. That would be fellows, contractors, any arrangement, a staffing arrangement that needs to be paid that is going to move the project forward for us, where we're not begging people to put people on projects anymore, which is the problem that we're trying to solve for. Where we go to governing board and say, please give us contributors to work into owners to stick around. So hopefully that will help us with that. Chris A. and Amy said that the resolution that we have for the community of practice for managers and training for cloud native participation in the communities is a great idea for a PGM. So we might be able to use general funds for that and not need to propose anything to the governing board anymore. So CNCF is on board with that idea to try to grow the ecosystem. The things again that we're trying to come up with resolutions for there are, making sure that the maintainers that we have don't walk away with institutional knowledge because they're not supported at their day jobs for whatever reason. How to hire and retain contributors and maintainers, things like that. So the part about the good news though, from a process standpoint, everything that goes to the board has to start with a service desk ticket, even if it is large and ambiguous, even if it is something like a problem that we don't know yet or how to solve, that should go and start with service desk first. So it's not just, I think all of us were using service desk as a very specific function of, hey, we need this one thing now, but we should really start to use it as we need all the things from CNCF and not just necessarily this, one little transactional piece of, information. I'm looking at my time, Christoph. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is introducing an alternate. I wanted to try to see what folks' thoughts were about that today. Let me explain the problem again for folks that don't understand on the call right now. The problem is there's one seat for the Kubernetes developer rep on the governing board right now. All other members, with the exception of Richie Hartman, who's the developer rep for CNCF projects, all other members have alternates, meaning, if you are at Google or VMware or any one of the other member companies that sit on the GB, you have an alternate. That person can sit in when you're absent for whatever reason. They sort of act as, again, your alternate, your literal alternate in that stance. I think based on the experience that I've had and Michelle had before me, that it would be a very wise decision for us to have an alternate, because that also will help us with onboarding instead of having these very harsh term limits while we all are carrying, the programs and resolutions and things to the board that we're carrying. It would be very nice to have someone as sort of a partner that you can hand off these things to, that you're not having such a hard handoff with. And also, I am a human and sometimes I might need to miss a meeting. So it would be good to have at least a voice there. And I think right now we are in a good spot because DIMS is also on the board as a TOC chair. So I always know that there's a voice there for us. But when DIMS rolls off of steering, we won't necessarily have that voice. I mean, obviously DIMS will be forever us, but it will still be nice to have an alternate. So I wanted to open up quick conversations or discussions as to what you all think about that idea.
I'm going to try to keep this brief as we're running a little bit behind. Stephen, do you have a quick question?
Yeah, comment. I am in favor. I would say that if our current alternate is going to be rolling off of steering within the year, then we choose one that is, I mean, if our current rep is rolling off within the year, then we choose one that has the full 2-year term as the alternate, so that we have that continuity.
Exactly. Yeah, that piece I think is crucial.
And did I hear right that the other GB reps already have alternates, and we're just basically asking to have the same thing that the other reps do?
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
Richie doesn't have an alternate, Paris.
No, that's what I'm saying. I said Richie and myself were the ones that do not have alternates. So, I mean, maybe I can get Richie to ask for an alternate as well or something. Yeah.
Last question before we move on. Tim in the chat. Does the alternate have voting privileges or no?
No. I think, actually, Dims, I think in the time of absenteeism, meaning if the primary is not there for the meeting, I believe the alternate can vote.
Yes, you can cast the vote.
Yes.
As directed by the primary. Yeah.
Yeah. And only in the times of absence, though. Like they would not be able, like if I'm there and there's an alt, then they would not be able to weigh in. I would have to weigh in.
Okay. Thank you for all that, Paris. We're going to kind of keep chugging along. You have one more quick note here about KubeCon tickets. Yep.
We have been chugging along on this for a few years with how do we get contributors KubeCon tickets and/or travel funds. It's literally an and/or situation depending on the contributors' needs. And then obviously, not obviously, but some of our leads have also asked for things like recognition, swag in the form of KubeCon tickets and things like that. So I just wanted to at least put an FYI to the steering committee that I did file all of those use cases in as a ticket for things that we're going to need. It looks like we might not make Detroit, but we're going to still keep chugging along on this initiative. So that's really all I wanted to say about that.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Paris. We're now going to move into the remainder of our agenda. It looks like you have the first item here, elections update.
I talk here a lot, y'all, for all the newbies, by the way. This is a very standard thing for us. I see Josh is on the line, so I actually would love if Josh could come on and give us any kind of election update. But I think we should definitely talk about the things that we need to do to kick off the process, because there are things that we owe. And Josh, are you on right now?
Yes, yes, I am. Okay, so as usual, we're implementing changes this year in our effort to constantly get to a sustainable election maintenance state. Part of that involves the creation of the election sub-project of contributor experience, so that we have a team that is dedicated to maintaining our elections year-round and not just when we're planning a steering committee election. The side effect of that is we will be able to support elections other than the steering committee election if SIGs want to have like an election for chairs or something. There's a work in progress PR out, waiting on feedback and approval by our tech leads. If somebody can paste that into the notes, that would be great. The notes are being a little slow for me. The good news is that as soon as we have the election sub-project, we do have 3 candidates for election officer. We would like to have 1 alternate, because the next step is submitting that slate of election officers to the steering committee, who will then approve or modify or send it back, depending. And if we have an alternate, then it makes it a lot easier for steering to change the choices if required. The goal here is to have our new election officers picked and to have them submit a draft schedule for the election to steering by the end of the month. The other thing that's going to be happening concurrently with that is last year was our first year using Electo for the steering committee election. Our security response team in Kubernetes very helpfully gave me a slate of things where security in Electo could be better. That led to a whole bunch of improvements in Electo itself. So we're going to be taking Electo down and upgrading it this month.
Thanks,
I'm
Josh.
sorry, Josh, can you repeat what you said about the target by the end? I missed what you included in that list.
So by the end of the goal is by the end of the month to have a chosen set of election officers and to have those election officers submit a draft schedule for the election for steering to approve.
Okay, so it sounds like our actions technically aren't until the end of this month, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have questions from steering about the election? All right. And then the other election topic that we had was Code of Conduct Committee. Tim, are you still good with running the election as the liaison? And did you want to do any updates about that today? No is fine as well.
Yeah, I'm good for that, and no particular updates today,
Okay.
other than we will get going on it this month ahead of it normally happening August, September.
Awesome. Yes. And then Christoph, I think we're done with that section.
Yeah. If you wanted to use Electo for that election, Tim, please ping me.
Okay. Thank you for the offer.
Great. Any last questions from anyone on elections before we move on? Moving right along. Okay, I've got the next item. I wanted to put out there, do we want to do a steering committee session for KubeCon North America 2022 in Detroit? I know we typically have put on a session. I want to throw it out there if anybody has any thoughts or concerns. Just want to, if we do want to, we just need to get it submitted before Monday. Stephen.
I'm in. I will be there. I think we should cover what we usually do, in addition to some talk about output from the annual reports. Yeah.
Great. Dim's already +1 in the chat.
+1 for me.
And this would be, I'm sorry, we're +1ing the idea of another AMA style.
Yes.
Yes, +1.
Okay. Then I will say, unless anybody has any objections at this point, then we will submit something. And then we'll obviously have to figure out like attendees and that kind of stuff closer to the date. But we'll at least submit something and get something in to do another AMA style panel like we have done previously. Great. Moving right along. Bob, you've got the next topic, the proposal for a service mesh working group.
So you have your hand up?
Oh.
Yeah, real quick, since we have so many people here, I'm actually interested if, like, I really like the style personally. I want to see from the community, are the people interested in seeing us do things differently, or topics that you'd like to have us cover?
Okay, there's a few responses in the chat that the AMA style is good. Bridget.
I think as a community member, one of the main reasons you show up at something like the steering committee, in-person session is because you're wondering, is there a path for me to get from here in the audience to there? And so I feel like talking a little bit about the behind the scenes so that people could understand what that pipeline looks like would probably help with your future recruiting.
Awesome. Thank you.
I think it's that time for our Contribex to steering pipeline keynote, Christoph. So thank you, Bridget. That just gave me validation for something that I've been saying for a while.
Great. Anybody else has any last comments? Great. Thank you, everyone, for the input, and thanks, Stephen, for bringing that up. Okay, now we will actually move on. Bob, Service Mesh Working Group proposal.
Sure. I mostly just wanted to get this on our radar. This proposal came in not too long ago. It is a little funky versus some of our other working groups that we have. Right now, there's only one stakeholder SIG, and it seems largely about integrating with external projects to get stuff more aligned with the Gateway API. Actually, Tim, you might have a little, do you have, is that sort of sum it up?
Yeah, I think the impetus is there's a opportunity to align multiple projects in the form of the Gateway API. And the folks who are driving the core of the Gateway API are kind of harried, focused on the core of it. And so they are putting their thumbprint on a working group to focus on the mesh specific aspects of it.
Thank you, Steve, for calling out that Keith is also on the line. Do you have any other comments about it?
Sorry, I'm struggling to operate a mouse because of a numb hand from surgery this morning. But hey, to everyone I haven't met, I'm Keith. Put together the working group proposal with contributions from lots of other folks. But yeah, you've basically covered it. We don't want to dilute or overwhelm a lot of the great work happening in Gateway API, and a working group has seemed like the best kind of way to go about doing that work. Another sub project seems weird because we're not owning code, and that seems to be kind of the big differentiator for a working group versus others. I recognize there's only really one stakeholder SIG, but open to other comments or suggestions here around this. The proposal has been linked in the agenda. Thanks to whoever did that.
Stephen?
Stephen.
So yeah, I guess the one bit of clarity around the governance structures is that a working group would be across, one would be across multiple SIGs, and two, there's some aspect of time boundiness. So not necessarily an explicit turn-off date, but an idea that it may no longer be required in the future. So that, and also to mention that for sub projects, we do have lots of sub projects that I'm not on camera, but I'll put in quotes, don't own code, but are still sub projects. So definitely possible, but figuring out the boundaries, who owns what, as well as the time boundiness, will help you determine what shape it should be in.
Yeah. And one other general comment, like, you don't necessarily have to have a working group to have, like, Zoom meetings and things like that. As far as like sending out invites, there's a number of sub projects that also do that. They get sent out to the various lists and get on people's calendars. So even if the output of this is not necessarily a working group being formed, there's still at least like a path forward to continue the work in the project.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to address one of the points there, the goal is for this to spin down. I want to say, like, the goal is for mesh concerns to be first party consideration in Gateway API. There just tends at the moment that it seems to be not the focus of the mainstream thing. There hasn't seemed to be a lot of prior art for something like this, a sub project of a sub project. And so the working group is what we've kind of gone with. If the PR has been submitted, not typically sure what happens after this. If conversation just continues to happen in GitHub, also happy to chat with whoever else about or in the Google Doc for the charter. But yeah, just wanted to get this out there and appreciate you bringing this up, Bob, on the agenda today.
Jordan?
Yeah, I'll kind of echo what Stephen was saying about like normally the reason we have working groups is to sort of understand where work is intersecting between SIGs. I totally get like if the folks working on Gateway are busy and this isn't something else that can be put on their plate. You can actually like have multiple work streams under a single sub project. So if this is really just trying to organize work under SIG network, a sub project seems like the most lightweight way to do that. And like this doesn't have to be super formal. If you want to split out a work stream and say like we're trying to work with the CNCF folks and we need like a Zoom meeting and a YouTube link or whatever, like we can totally do that without needing the overhead of another working group.
Thanks, Jordan. Stephen?
Same comments that the infrastructure is in place to support y'all, however you decide to carve it up. But I would say for the working group side, just be sure to have support from your SIGs and organizers who will be active, because I feel like that will make the difference if you do decide to go that route.
Thank you. So I've got my hand up, so I'll take the next quick comment. I wanted to say that while in practice, our working group efforts have been typically cross-SIG or have multiple stakeholder SIGs, it's not an explicit requirement. The only explicit requirements that we have for working group, and I'll take the working group governance doc and put it in the chat. Basically, you have to not own code. You have to have clear entry and exit criteria and not have any organizational authority, but influence. That's all that we explicitly require for a working group. So I still want to, I haven't yet completely read through the proposal, but like skimming it and that kind of stuff. I don't have any strong objections to it being a working group if that gives it the organizational structure that would support this particular effort. But I also agree, like it could just as easily be a sub project of SIG Network. Like it, I don't think it makes a huge difference either way. The biggest difference with a working group is there are specific overhead and reporting requirements around a working group that because needs to be clear entry and exit criteria. So you need to report on how you're progressing towards your exit criteria and being able to spin it back down. Mike.
Hey, I just wanted to speak up, like, as someone who's been active in the Gateway API sub-project, as well as part of this initiative, to whether it ends up being a formal working group or a work stream. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of like speak to like the motivation for this kind of structure was to explicitly not have it as a parallel effort as like a sub-project at the same level as Gateway API to avoid any kind of conflict around questions of code ownership, questions of authority. So like this initiative would be explicitly focused on channeling enhancement proposals into Gateway API and letting the Gateway API sub-project and the leads there have like a decision-making authority, so that this group would not be owning it or kind of like spinning out on a parallel track. And yeah, like Gateway API work sub-project has largely been focused on north-south, and it seems like there's a whole heck of a lot of work that is consuming the vast majority of the active participants in that group's time currently. And that was kind of the intent, was to like have this as a focused effort for folks who are interested in expanding it without becoming a distraction.
Thanks, Mike. Tim?
So for the sake of forward progress, why don't we just say NAC on working group and make this just explicitly a sub project, and we'll run it ourselves. We don't think we need a formal acknowledgement of it from this level. So it seems like it's just a lot of overhead for not enough gain. So we can take that back to SIG Network. And I to all the folks who are proposing a working group, we'll make sure that it's got its legitimacy within SIG Network.
Yeah, to echo what Christoph said, like if we find that the organizational structure just requires like this level, like we always have the option to create it. But I like that. Starting with less, I agree.
Okay, great. Is there any last comments on this proposal or this topic? Great. Thank you everyone for the discussion. We will keep moving on. So we've got two more topics, both involve steering charter changes. Stephen, would you like to introduce the first one?
For sure. So the first one is related to the second one, but that is I will let Paris kick off the second one, and then we can jump in. So as part of some changes that were introduced, are proposed to the steering charter. We recognize some places where there were some opportunities to improve documentation, really make sure things are properly linked. So part of the Git foo within the PR was bringing points that were easily movable to a separate PR into a separate PR. So 249 basically just lists what our process for enacting changes are, and cross-links some information about our election process. So from what I'm seeing on the PR, at least, we've done some reviews and we've had some steering acts. I would like to call a vote for that. This PR is effectively a no-op change, really. It's just linking things that already exist.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Is there any discussion on this? We've got a full slate of steering committee members looking at our process as far as changes to the charter. If there are no objections, we could call a vote at any time. Is there any discussion on this, either in the community or from steering committee members on this particular change? Okay, no discussion. Great. I will explicitly ask then, is there any objections from any steering committee members to having a vote on this? Great. Then I will move this up to the vote section and we will have a vote on this particular topic.
I am in favor, given that I issued the PR.
Great. I am also in favor of this change. I read it as a no-op. Dims?
+1 from me.
Great. Jordan?
+1.
Bob?
+1.
Paris?
+1.
And Tim?
+1.
Great. Okay, we've got a recorded vote. All 7 members are in favor of this particular change.
And I am canceling the hold. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. Great. We're chugging right along. Okay. The second charter change that we have was introduced by Paris. Paris, do you want to intro it for us?
Yes. So yeah, like Stephen said, this actually came before the last. The intention of the PR was to document the life cycle. Clearly, some of that life cycle was boilerplate and linking from other document cleanup. So we took that off, which leaves us a couple of sections left from our life cycle. Most notably removal, which I think we have, 150 plus comments on in itself. I think we have landed at a state though where, there's only a few discussion points left, sort of at a high level for us to go through. And this is just, from curating several comments that still have not, do not have any kind of resolution. One of them is, how do we communicate context on a no confidence vote? Another is the abstention piece. Do we keep that in? And yeah, I guess that's the same kind of question for all of the membership section. So what should we keep? What should we not keep as far as this PR? Like, is it too bloated? So I feel like there's a couple of discussion points that we need to discuss today and run with. So I'm curious if any steering committee members want to pick up one of those topics and run with it.
Sure. So I will, hi everyone. I am co-author on that PR and did a bunch of the Git foo. So I wrote up kind of the summary to basically where we are. There have been a lot of things that we've introduced in the PR for the sake of completeness. And I feel like some of those points have turned into maybe boiling the ocean, right? So we kind of backed out some of those changes and opened up a separate issue to say like, hey, let's capture all of the review feedback and work on the pieces that are kind of longer tail objectives. So what remains here, I believe, are 2 points or one point and another point with multiple subpoints. So the first is, how should steering communicate context for a no confidence vote? And the second one is deciding on whether we just defer discussion around vacancies within the committee, specifically around how far down the stack do we go for previous runners if there is a vacancy before we consider calling a special election. The next is, how many seats should be filled or can be filled in that manner. And then the last subpoint is deciding not to fill a seat if the vacancy is happening within N time before the next election. So I think those are the ones that we should discuss first and foremost, given the review comments, and everything else is maybe in scope for a separate discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, Paris and Stephen. I'll open the floor if you have comments, if you want to talk about a specific point. Please raise your hand. David.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I am most concerned about how we communicate why this is being considered. I think it's very important for observers of the process to be able to look and say, okay, I understand why this person is being targeted for removal. And then I can see, and this is how I would like to see how everyone voted on it as well. I think both of those things are important for deciding future actions by community members. Who am I going to vote for? Do I think this was fair? How do I get my feedback in? I can only provide feedback if I know.
And for clarity, David, you're just because it wasn't explicitly stated there, you're referring to if this process is to be merged into the charter and then be used, how it's used, as opposed to the meta conversation about the process that we're using right now to change the charter. You didn't say it explicitly, so I just want to call out the differentiation.
This process for changing the charter. I think this process is very good. I see a PR opened. There's a period for comment. It's all public. We can all talk about it. You accept input, and then the steering committee decides. I think that process is very good.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Stephen.
Hey, yeah. So I agree in the sense that and responded the same to your review comments, that as a community member and a voter, I would want some level of explanation to kind of help inform my future votes, and especially if that means that someone that the committee was interested in removing would be running again. And you know, and I don't necessarily have the context. I think my personal feeling is that you know, this can be potentially batched, as you know, not all. I don't think all feedback should be public. I do think that we have some responsibility to provide some sort of explanation around it, and I think that that can maybe be the aggregate of some of the feedback that we've received. The you know, I hesitate to +1 any suggestions of introducing a process that requires people to provide public feedback, given that the scope of steering includes both public and private matters. I do think that they're depending on the reasons for calling the vote, that people may want to supply their feedback in private.
So providing feedback in private is different than trying to have a removal process based on a private scenario. So imagine a case where you even have a template and the template gets filled in and they say, so-and-so has harmed a disadvantaged group and violated the trust of our community. We have no confidence in this individual's leadership and she should be removed. And then a community member might come up and say, well, okay, how did she do that? And you get back a response of, well, it's private. I can't tell you, but trust me, it's important. And a community member has no way to really have confidence in that. How do they know that it's really important? Was there some sort of censure somewhere else we can look at and see? Just it's private, but trust me, is very unsatisfying.
This is an existing
Stephen?
issue relative to code of conduct.
Sorry, Tim,
yeah.
I'm gonna go use the hands cue. Stephen?
Yeah, sorry. I had Tim, go first. I'll keep my hand up.
I don't want to open a can of worms because this has been sitting festering for a while anyway, but our committees are chartered with the ability to act in private. And there is a fundamental trust issue there. Code of Conduct Committee has been struggling with that for years. I don't know that we're going to get an answer to it here, but I really appreciate that it is getting more consideration now.
So yeah, I think given especially some of the discussion we've had around voting requirements for enacting a change like this, I feel it turns into a different question of the community has elected several officials to operate in this capacity, and there is, for us to operate in private, there has to be some expectation of trust within the community for us to be able to do that stuff faithfully for you. So I feel like the question that's also being asked is, do we trust the steering committee? And that's something that was kind of like, hey, let's also talk about disillusion. And that's something that was deferred to there's several bits of feedback in the PR, and that was deferred to the follow-ups. So I think that's a much bigger question and maybe a scarier one. I would hope that we as a community trust our governing bodies to do the things that they're supposed to.
Thanks, Stephen. Chris? You are muted, Chris.
As a community member, I know that things happen behind the scenes. I know things happen publicly. If a steering committee member is going up against a vote of no confidence, and the message is trust us, I don't think that's going to fly very well, because a lot of the contributors don't know y'all. To be honest, I mean, they know of you, but they don't necessarily know you. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Chris. Paris?
There we go. I feel like any artifact that we leave on the internet with extensive reasoning is a harm to all parties involved. Not just the reporter, not just the person voting no confidence, but I feel like our artifacts here in this public meeting should suffice for the reasonings of future harm in the forms of retaliation, in the forms of the internet's forever, in the forms of future biases. So I think that I definitely agree that we should give a reason following our no confidence, what that reasoning is as to why we don't have confidence anymore. But I feel like any other artifact is harmful.
Thank you. Dims?
Hi. So at most what we could go for is a public summary text of the vote and, a small description of, why we don't have confidence. If there is a longer text that we used during the process, that should be saved somewhere in private so that it's available for future steering folks to go back and refer to it. That is the maximum that we can do at this time on this topic. We cannot satisfy everybody, and we cannot satisfy the curiosity. And if people don't have confidence in a steering, there is a time to vote for sure. So that is basically, what I would advocate for, having a public summary and a private, storing it for future steering. So if you really want to know, then get to the steering, go look at what was the context.
Thanks, Dims. I'm actually, David, sorry, 1 sec. I'm actually, as we're getting to the end of our time, I'm actually also going to allow folks who haven't spoken before to kind of jump the queue. There looks to be enough time to still everybody in the queue to talk, but I'm going to let folks that haven't spoken before to jump it. Kirsten.
I just had one comment on the pull request. It's a little bit unrelated to this exact conversation at hand, but it's the idea that we're deferring conversation on some of the points to a later date, like in another follow-up PR. But if the PR merges as is, there's no, it becomes part of the charter with no indication of what sections are still kind of a work in progress. So that was just my one concern, is if we're saying, if you're saying, okay, well, we'll update this section at a later date with a little more detail, I think it would be nice to indicate in text that, maybe with an asterisk or with some sort of notation to note that that's not the final representation of that section of the charter. That was just a kind of concern that I had.
Great, thanks, Kirsten. David.
I see the purpose of transparency as a time for reflection for the author, commentary from observers, and accountability for people who initiate and do this process. And trying to avoid that, to avoid future accountability and effectively prevent community commentary, seems antithetical to a community being able to have confidence in this process. There are many things that can happen privately, and I understand that. And I understand that some things perhaps must happen privately, but removal of an elected representative does not seem like a valid thing to happen privately.
Thanks, David. Tim?
I'm a little sensitive to the notion of having a private record if artifacts are created, especially without like a document retention policy. I do believe in the notion of redemption, and I kind of bristle at the idea that people would come into the role specifically to go read the history and see the dirt or something.
If it's kept private, I mean, what do we expect to happen?
I'd like us to kind of stick to the queue and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak. Stephen.
Yeah, so to Kirsten's point, so any content in the charter that merges would be considered effective, on the time of merge. So before anything happens with that PR, I am going to again carve it up so that it's in discrete pieces about what changes are happening. Anything that is still under discussion was entirely removed from the PR, just to be clear. So there's no worry of like what I don't want to get into an instance of is where we can go back to SHA and say, well, the rules were this at this SHA. It won't be like that. Anything that is still up for discussion is not in the PR right now. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Stephen. I'm just going to throw out, we're at 5 minutes left in the meeting. If you have something to comment, I would definitely recommend raising your hand to do so. Paris.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to go back to David and wanted to maybe have some dialogue with David about the private actions. Because the way that I see the policy laid out right now, there's nothing private about that. Meaning we would have to do this in a public meeting, we would have to do this in some other public communication network channel, etc. So I was curious as to what part of this you think is private.
There is no requirement for the vote of no confidence to contain details about why there is no confidence. So yes, the call is made publicly, but there is no requirement that there be an explanation for why it is appropriate to do this.
You, Stephen?
Does that open, hold it, can I continue here with David really quick?
Go for it, Paris.
I feel like the why though, it opens up to you not being satisfied with the why, and then and then there's more issues, right? Like what do we codify in the why that would make you satisfied that we are actually telling you why? You see what I'm saying here?
I do, and I think that's the reason why steering, similar to this decision-making process for changing the rules, takes input, but ultimately makes the decision potentially against the input that is given. But without a requirement to specify why, it becomes possible to never explain it. And so having something that says you must put your why here, and someone points out this why doesn't actually say why, it is possible. I can't stop steering from deciding, you know what, we're just not going to tell you. But there is a spot where they have to admit, I'm just not going to tell you. And that is different than saying we have a vote of no confidence and our reasons are private.
I think that most of the steering committee members here are agreeing with you. I mean, obviously I can't speak for everybody, but I feel like everyone would be prepared to state a why with no confidence. And that's something that we would be able to codify in this policy. I just don't think, I think it's going to be a back and forth process. At least that's what I see, of not healthy behavior for a community on a public record to go back and forth with, I don't agree with your why. Or why, or why I need more, or things like that. I think that is discourse that is not healthy.
I think that's
I'm
how
gonna
it can help.
step in for a sec. David, I'm gonna give
Yeah.
you a brief moment to respond to what Paris just said, and then I'm gonna go through the hands in the queue, and that'll probably take us to time. So if you have like
All right.
a quick
I have
quick
the,
response
like,
there, would be great.
30 seconds here. I think that having a template can help guide people to produce reasons why that can be convincing, right? And so instead of just a why, a statement of transgressions with specific examples would be great. Or even adding more to the template saying public censure for X, Y, and Z, or examples of inappropriate behavior. And I think a template can help there a lot. And I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, David. Last chance to enter the queue. We'll try to keep things to 1 minute each. Stephen first, and then Tim.
Yeah, so we have, I think in that PR, we have provided avenues for public feedback. And on this call, we have said that I've heard several steering members say that we are fine with providing reasons, whether it be individual or in aggregate. I feel like that's sufficient. I'm personally a strong -1 for an explicit transgressions.md to be committed somewhere. So I will cede the floor there.
Thank you, and Tim.
So I'm roughly in agreement with David, except I'm less of a template person and more of a, you got to fit it inside of a brief statement. So I think in the PR, I described it as like 100 words or less, right? Like, to me, that feels like it was transparent enough. Nothing's going to stop anybody from lying or deflecting or saying, word salad, but I don't, there's a level of trust at some point. The turtle at the bottom is that I trust the committee members to be forthright in their statement here. I don't think it needs to be a cross-examination. I don't think it should be. I think it is a statement, and that's it.
Thank you, Tim. And with that, we are at time. I would like to thank everyone for joining today and for a healthy discussion on a long list of topics. If you are interested in the work that steering does, we have an election coming up, as was stated earlier. If you have interest in the role and what we do, definitely reach out to us. Otherwise, if there are
Chris,
comments.
Sorry to jump in. I do have the comments being that we should decide when vote for the current content changes.
So as far as the current content changes go, I think there's still open discussion items, unless you're calling for a vote right now, which I'm going to actually say no, because we're over time.
Because we're over time. Yeah.
So we can, as far as current feedback on the second charter change and the discussions around it, you can either comment publicly on the PR. If you have private comments or commentary, feel free to reach out to steering-private@kubernetes.io. Otherwise, you can reach the steering committee in our public mailing list, steering@kubernetes.io, or our public Slack channel, steering-committee in slack.capes.io. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We will wrap it up here. We have our next public meeting next month. Thanks so much, everyone.
Later, everyone.